I'm not sure. Kathy Long, could you see if you could record it as a co-host?
I have started the recording.
Okay, so when I go to slideshow, I lose my Zoom powers. So I am going to leave it like this and we will work from here. And I would like to, Becky, I am going to spotlight you and we're going to work from there. So can people see this slide and most of the screen?
Yes.
Okay, Becky, take it away.
Well, I will note somebody popped up a technical advice for you in a chat. You might look at that.
Okay.
Okay. Well, with a little bit of delay, thank you. This is the League of Women Voters presentation on what's happening in Rocky, an update on Rocky Mountain National Park. And as all of our meetings, our purpose is to provide information that will help people be informed and active citizens of the Estes Valley community. Today's presenters are Darla, Sidles, Superintendent of Rocky Mountain National Park, and Kyle Patterson, Management Specialist, Public Affairs Office, and they are going to address what's happening in Rocky. There are some ground rules. Microphones are muted, assuming that we've got some control over Zoom here. If you have a question, please enter it in the chat box, which should be at the bottom of your screen, depending on how you're set up. Please remember, we advocate civil discourse. We are recording this meeting and it will be available from our website. We recommend you choose speaker from the view option. The view option is different on everybody's computer. On mine, it happens to be on the right.
All right, so I'm privileged this morning to introduce our speakers. And first, Darla Sidles has been superintendent at Rocky Mountain National Park since August 2016. Prior to that, she served as superintendent at Saguaro National Park in Tucson, deputy superintendent at Independence National Historical Park in Philadelphia, and superintendent at Grand Canyon Parashant National Monument. She also served 2 short-term assignments in Washington, D.C. Sidles began her career as a Student Conservation Association volunteer and worked seasonally in the North Cascades, Denali, Arches, Big Bend, and Zion National Parks. Along with Superintendent Sidles, we have Kyle Patterson. Kyle is the Management Specialist, Public Affairs Officer at Rocky Mountain National Park, and she serves on the park's leadership team. Her main duties include media relations and community outreach. She has been at Rocky in this position since 2001. Prior to this, she was the Public Information Officer at Mount Rushmore National Memorial. Please, let's all join in welcoming Darla Sidles and Kyle Patterson to our meeting this morning.
Very good. Good morning, everyone. Good to see a lot of familiar faces, and it seems like it's been a long time since we've had the opportunity to see you all in person. Kyle and I were chatting last night and recalling that the last time we met with you was in February, right before all this COVID stuff hit last year, and that we were able to actually have an in-person meeting. And I told her I thought it felt like it was a couple of years ago. It's hard to believe it was, just barely over a year ago, but my, how things have changed and what an interesting year we've had. So sure wish we could be there in person with you today. It would be a lot more fun to see you and get to shake your hands and hug your necks. But hopefully next time we'll be able to do that. But we really appreciate the opportunity to be with you here virtually. and give you an update on the park, and then offer plenty of time afterwards to take your questions. So with that, we'll get started with an agenda here. This is the topics we're going to be talking about today. Just a few real brief DOI and National Department of Interior and National Park Service updates. And then we want to talk to you about, the key issues really that we're dealing with right now. One, which is the long range visitor use management planning. And then another one, which is this year's visitor use management plan, what our pilot that we're implementing this year. A little overview of the fires from last year, and then just a few highlighted park projects. So Kyle and I will be tag teaming this. I'll take a few things and she'll take a few things. We'll go back and forth. And feel free to ask your questions. I don't know what the protocol is for that. So if somebody knows that, maybe put it in chat. If you're, answering questions or asking questions via chat, or waiting until the end. So at any rate, we'll get started. So let's kick off with the next screen. So probably many of you know, as great stewards of women in leadership, that our Department of the Interior new secretary was just appointed last month, and her name is Deb Holland, and she is from New Mexico. Served on the subcommittee for national parks actually, and is now our new Department of Interior secretary. It's very exciting to have her in place. She is the first Native American female, or Native American of any kind, to hold a cabinet position, and the first Native American secretary. So we are thrilled to have her in the leadership position in Washington, and hopefully before too long there will be an announcement of the National Park Service director. That position has been vacant for well over 4 years now. The last time we had a director in the National Park Service, a permanent one, was Director John Jarvis. And for the last 4.5 years, it's been an acting person in there, several different rotating individuals. And so we're waiting with bated breath to get an update on our new leadership of the National Park Service director. So we'll move on. You've probably heard these before. This is the new administration's priorities. And this is really, a presidential priorities, not so much DOI, although they are very much in alignment, as you will see. So first, of course, the most important thing going on right in the world collectively is the recovery of COVID-19, climate change, adaptation, alternative energy, obviously economic recovery, especially after COVID, and then racial and social injustice. And then more recently, a couple of emphasis items were added, something that you'll probably be hearing more about, called the 30 by 30 initiative. And that is to protect more than 30% of the United States lands by 2030. And so obviously, in the Park Service, we have a role in that, as well as all of the other public land management agencies throughout the federal government. So as you all know, the Land Water Conservation Fund was permanently authorized last year, which is fantastic. And that is our avenue for procuring additional lands and working toward this 30 by 30 initiative. And then the last additional emphasis item is on tribal relations. And we've got a good long-standing relationship here in Rocky with the tribes that continue to have a very strong presence and influence on the park. And so, as you can see, those are the broad priorities, but many of them fit within Rocky Mountain National Park. So, as the new administration, the Department of Interior administrations get settled, we'll be hearing more. It's been pretty quiet. I think it's just a matter of coming in and getting accustomed to the new role and figuring out what to tackle first. Okay, so let's jump right in. As I mentioned, we want to talk about two different visitor use management items today, and I'm going to talk about the long range management plan, and then Kyle will talk specifically about what we're doing this year, the temporary pilot that we're doing this year. So for the long range management plan, you all know every time we've met with you, you know, in many years, we talk about congestion and crowding. And as residents of Estes Park, you're all very, very much aware of how popular Rocky has become. We, you know, have seen the 45% increase in the last 8 years or 9 years. And we are the third most, or in 2019, we were the third most visited national park in the country. So 2019, you know, it's really been ramping up even since I've been here in 2016. You'll see those statistics there on the screen. You know, even just 4 months out of 2019, we had 3.2 million people. And that number is continuing to go up, as you know. Interestingly, last year, you'll recall that we did the timed entry reservation system, which we had designed for about 60%, that's 60% of our maximum capacity. And even with that 60% capacity, which actually ended up being more like 70 or 75 when you account for the people that came on either side of the reservation, even with the timed entry, all of the issues with COVID, and then, you know, more than 3 months of wildland fires, we were still the 4th most visited park in the United States last year. So that kind of blew me away when I saw that statistic, because I thought, you know, surely we would be down significantly. And it was because all of the other parks, you know, many of them closed or had very, very few visitors for the summer. So you're very familiar that we've had a lot of visitors for many years, and it continues to increase. We'll just kind of start going through some of these photos just to give you a pictorial reminder of what some of the congestion has looked like over the past few years. You see the trailheads, this is an overlook, Forest Canyon overlook, and Bear Lake Trail area, people standing, you know, shoulder to shoulder, nose to nose. Obviously, this was not last year because of COVID. Here's some traffic congestion. You know, you see the cars lined up all the way down the road. As far as the eye can see, we've got lots of these kinds of pictures, but we're only showing you the 2 today. And then inside our visitor centers, we've, you know, seen just record crowds in there. And so since we've been seeing that increase in visitation, you all may recall that in 2016, we implemented the visitor use restrictions for congested areas in Rocky, and that included the Bear Lake area, the Alpine Visitor Center, and the Wild Basin area. And whenever, you know, crowding and congestion traffic warranted, we've been closing those areas. So between 2016 and 2019, we implemented those visitor use restrictions for the bulk of the summer, every day. As you all remember, you know, usually between 9 or 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., it would just be closed and not open until there was room to come back in. So the visitor use management is not new at all. But with COVID last year, you know, we decided to do something different. And so Kyle is going to talk about that, but I want to just finish here with this last slide on our long range planning effort. In 2017, we began this, you know, acknowledging that we can't just keep doing these, you know, hey, come back later, good luck, you know, kind of thing. We really needed to be more strategic, more holistic in our approach that would also, you know, really help people to plan in advance. So if you knew you wanted to come into the park, you were going to be able to get a reservation and, you know, come in and have a better experience because it wasn't completely jam-packed. You weren't waiting in the queue line for two miles, and you know, you had a little better opportunity to come in and have a good experience. And so as we started thinking about that long range planning effort, which I mentioned started in 2017, we have an ID team. We did get funding actually in 2018 or 2019 to kick off some like pre-NEPA, our National Environmental Policy Act meetings, our public engagement meetings. That got delayed, and then last year was COVID. And so we are kicking that off. And this again is the long-term management plan. It is not the pilots that we did last year or this year. What I'm talking about here is the long-term plan that will help guide us into the future with that more holistic approach. And so what we plan to do is kick off some public engagement meetings next month. And you'll be hearing more about that. We don't have the exact dates yet, but stay tuned. It will be a virtual series of meetings. And because Rocky is a national park, obviously it's going to be open across the United States, well, actually internationally, because we need to ensure that we're serving the greater good of the American people. And so we're going to be doing those public engagement meetings starting in May. And we'll collect information from you all. Let's see, do we have one more slide, Kyle, that shows? Yes, there it is. So the topics are that second bullet there. This is what we'll be talking about, is some of this that we've just talked about. Why are we doing a long range plan? It's because of this increased visitation and crowding and congestion and the need for a better plan going forward. We'll talk about our park-wide visitor use zone mapping that kind of breaks the park into different areas. For example, a front country zone where you would expect parking lots and visitor centers and traffic and cars and things like that. And then progressively more primitive opportunities that would include wilderness. We'll talk about those desired conditions. What do we want to ensure we preserve for those different zones? And then we'll be presenting a few different draft visitor use management strategies. And these are draft, these are just some ideas. And of course, because we've tried these pilots the last couple of years, those are likely to be presented in there in some format, just to provide you all a range of a starting point for you to get your feedback. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? This fall, we will prepare a report about those meetings and what we heard. And then hopefully next year, we will be kicking off the National Environmental Policy Act, the NEPA process, which is the official government process. And there will be more public meetings. We'll go back, we'll reframe things, we'll come up with some more, tighter alternatives, and then we'll come back to the public to get your opinion. So that's kind of a quick and dirty overview of the long-term plan. And as I mentioned, it does differ from what we've been doing since 2016. Those visitor use strategies from 2016 to 19, and then last year, the timed entry that we did. And then of course, this year, our plan for a two-system timed entry. So with that, I'll conclude the long-range planning and turn it over to Ms. Kyle, and she can talk about lessons learned from our process last year and what we're planning to do this year.
Thank you, Darla, and good morning, everyone. It's so great to be with you again. And as Darla discussed our conversation last night, remembering meeting you all at the Legion, and having a sense of normalcy before 2020 went really south. So it's great to be with you all again. As Darla mentioned, what I'm going to be talking about is very, very different from what she just was speaking about. So we want to emphasize that as much as possible, that we have two parallel tracks here, and we'll discuss that. We're continuing to put our pilot actions in place, and we'll talk about why. And that's very different than the visitor use long range planning that Darla just mentioned. So we're just going to walk down the road a little bit on what we did last year, and then what we're going to be doing this year as well. So again, as I'll just emphasize what Darla mentioned, last year, we all know what occurred. We closed the park down in late March 20th, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. CDC state and local guidelines, public health concerns. We continued to see a significant increase in visitation in March of last year. It really bumped up as other mountain communities started closing down. Just to remind everybody what that looked like. Steamboat Springs started, their ski areas closed down. Breckenridge, Summit County, Vale. And so we had a lot of people calling saying, we were going to go to fill out the mountain town, and now we're coming to Estes because those towns are basically closing down to visitors. So there was quick concern about the influx that we were seeing coming in to the Estes Park community in March of last year, excuse me, during spring break. So we closed the park down on March 20th. Very happy to reopen the park at the end of May with quickly developing a timed entry system to enable us to do that. The goal of that timed entry system was to reopen the park in a safe way so that we could manage crowding and congestion, better spread visitor use throughout the day. We knew we had gateway communities with at-risk populations and potential resource impacts in those communities. We had significant staffing challenges, and we'll talk about that we still have those because we rely so much on shared housing for our seasonal workforce. And because of COVID, that completely got wiped out last year, and we're seeing similarities this year as well. So we had about a third less staff last year, and we already run low in staffing. So just to have us all walk in each other's shoes a little bit. The shuttles in the Bear Lake Road corridor, as you all know, are a very important tool that we use to move visitors around and provide great visitor experiences with loop trails. Our shuttle capacity was down to about 15% last year, which also we knew was going to provide significant challenges in moving visitors. So you'll recall we started a timed entry system when we reopened the park on June 4th, and that went through October 11th. That system was for park-wide 6 a.m. to 5 p.m., 2-hour time blocks. We know that we all had to scramble to make that a successful project, and we so appreciate community members, our partners who helped us spread the word. And this system was put together rapidly in order for us to do this. So what did we learn from 2020? Okay, we all know this, but it was just confirmed. Bear Lake Road is popular, really, really popular, and the rest of the park oftentimes was underutilized. We joke that we should call it basically Bear Lake National Park and then Rocky Mountain National Park, because that's where everybody goes. We know that visitor demand can be shifted temporally, as we did see use spread out throughout the day. And so some people would joke and say, did you not think COVID was around prior to 6 a.m. and after 5 p.m.? That was not what our intention was. Our intention was to spread it out, knowing that we'd have visitors coming in times when we didn't have the reservation in place too. We were going to manage for that. And we just, as I just mentioned, we increased use outside the reservation period. And we knew that was going to happen, but we were really able to determine how much of that happened prior to 6 a.m. and particularly in the evening after 5 p.m. We saw a large influx of visitors coming in the evening. And again, as we mentioned, we're very grateful that there was a rapid adoption of the system by the public for those who planned ahead. For those that didn't plan ahead, it was very difficult for spontaneous visits to Rocky Mountain National Park last year. And we realized that. And as we talk about just what we're seeing in public lands throughout Northern Colorado, it's really difficult to have an enjoyable experience in a lot of public lands now in Northern Colorado if you don't plan ahead, for instance, with campground reservations, et cetera. So what are some pros from 2020 season? Visitor use more evenly spread throughout the day, and we flattened that peak visitation curve that our data has shown really spikes between 10 and 2. We were able to spread that out through the day. Gateway communities saw no significant reduction in sales tax, which when you think about COVID and timed entry and wildfires, that's pretty significant. Visitors did have the opportunity to plan their visit. We were better able to utilize our staff. As I mentioned, we were down a third of our staff to match that timed entry allocations. It reduced the queuing at the entrance stations and parking lots. So for those that want to remember what 2019 was like, it was very, very frequent for us to have lines from the Beaver Meadows entrance back to town, and oftentimes Fall River entrance was the same way. So that was reduced last year. And then, as Darla mentioned, it provided us an opportunity to study and learn many aspects of a timed entry permit system to see what or if parts of that might be considered for long range visitor use planning. Cons. Talked about this: short turnaround time to design and implement. Literally 4 to 5 weeks as working with recreation.gov to put this in place. So as a result of that, very understandable that it was challenging for some visitors and staff to access recreation.gov and or understand how to use it if they hadn't used that before. There were limited reservations. As Darla mentioned, we were managing for 60% of our usual visitation. It ended up being overall about 73% when you look at that pre and post reservation time period. So not everyone got in or for the time slot they wanted. We knew we were going to have some challenges at outlying park areas like Lumpy Ridge and Lily Lake and East Inlet Trail on the west side, and we did. The 48-hour advance reservations that we tried to implement to help people with that spontaneous visit or last minute visit were like tickets to the most, the film or the movie or the play that you want to see. They were usually gone in 2 minutes. And even though we shared with everybody, don't count on those, we know that a lot of people were disappointed and thought that they were going to get that 48-hour advance reservations. Again, there was some visitor confusion with rec.gov, and there were impacts to cross-park travel, people that use Trail Ridge Road that are coming from different parts of the state that are using that road to possibly stay off of Interstate 70. So what are we seeing since we opened up the timed entry permit system on October 11th? Darla mentioned that we saw an increase in our November visitation of 28%. Our December visitation of last year increased by 38%. We're seeing continued increases in local visitation. Our area public lands were experiencing up to 200% increases last year. And many of the experts are saying that's going to just continue to increase, and they're actually calling it the COVID crush, where people are wanting to get out even more after COVID and vaccinations and et cetera, et cetera. We know that other public lands in northern Colorado are looking to implement visitor use management pilots to try to manage for this COVID crush, in addition to what they already saw last year. COVID-19 guidelines are continuing for 2020. I know we all thought that at the stroke of midnight in 2021, this would all go away. That's obviously not the case. Many of you might be aware that in February, we have a federal mask mandate in Rocky Mountain National Park, which means that people that are visiting Rocky Mountain National Park, it's required to wear a mask inside any facilities and outside if you cannot maintain a 6-foot distance. So more crowded trails and areas that might be narrow, if you cannot keep a 6-foot distance, masks are required. I mentioned last year we had a reduced shuttle bus capacity. We know we're going to have that again this year. We're hoping it increases a little bit to possibly 50%. We also know that we have some impacts to some trails, which Darla will reference here shortly on what that looks like. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have continued reduced seasonal staff due to COVID-19 and shared housing. So we came forward with a proposal and are moving forward with that proposal to do 2 types of reservations. And many of you might be already aware of this, but we'll use this opportunity to just share this again for reservations for the Bear Lake Road corridor access. So this will be the Trail Ridge Road junction up. This will also include access to the rest of the park as well. That reservation period will be from 5 a.m. to 6 p.m. Last year, prior to 6 a.m., we know we had a lot of people that came into the park and oftentimes Bear Lake parking lot was filled by 6 a.m. Then the second type of reservation will be a reservation for access to the rest of the park. So that will be all areas excluding the Bear Lake Road corridor between 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. The reservations will be required Friday, May 28th through October 11th. And those reservations will begin on May 1st with a rolling reservation period. So you can do up to a month in advance, roughly. These are what some of the time slots look like. So very similar to last year in that they're 2-hour time blocks to enter the park. And these are the benefits of the two types of reservations. It allows for a greater number of reservations per day because we know that Bear Lake was busy last year, truly just almost as busy as it was in 2019 with a little bit more spread out use through the day, which was key for our shuttle buses. So we didn't have those significant lines with crowding with people really congested. Reservations would be based on approximately 75 to 85% of park total parking capacity. So last year it was roughly 60%. We saw again that Bear Lake was very full and that most days Alpine Visitor Center parking lot was half full. So this will help us spread use throughout the park to better utilize all parking and trailhead areas. We realize that this is a very difficult for particularly locals, those of us that live on the doorsteps that love our spontaneous access to our national park. And so we're also hoping that the shorter rest of park reservation period allows for greater flexibilities of locals to be able to get into the rest of the park prior to 9 or after 3. Will help those that have cross park travel, particularly those people that were coming eastbound from the western part of the state and we're sitting in our Kawanichi Visitor Center parking lot at 5 waiting to travel. This allows that to be a little bit earlier in the day and later in the morning for those without reservations. And it will enable us to be adaptable to changes in visitation trends and public health as well. We also wanted to just share as I wrap up that other national parks and public lands are doing similar things. So you may recall that last year, Rocky was the first park to do the timed entry permit in our eagerness to reopen the park at the end of May. Yosemite National Park is doing it again this year as they did last year with some adjustments as well. Glacier National Park has started a reservation system this summer for the Going to the Sun Road. Acadia National Park has a reservation system as well, and that's part of a long-range transportation plan that they've embarked on. Zion National Park last year did shuttle bus reservations and are potentially doing that again this summer. And you may recall from our last conversations with you all that there's been a number of national parks like Muir Woods and Haleakala who have had reservations for a number of years now. We also know our partners with the U.S. Forest Service and Maroon Bells and Hanging Lake began reservations a few years ago as well. And so I will finish up my, my comments on that, but also realize that we will likely have a lot of questions that we can talk about pertaining to that system at the end when we talk about Q&A. So I'll pass it back over to Darla.
Okay, very good. All right, so let's go on to another highlight, lowlight of last year, and that is our Wildland Fires. I'm sure you are all well versed in this, and probably many of you were evacuated, so this is definitely near to your heart. But just an overview of what happened and kind of the timing and some of the efforts that are going on this year. So as you all might remember, the Cameron Peak Fire started back in August and started up by the Long Draw Reservoir up on the Forest Service north of Long Draw. And, you know, initially we thought that that was going to be our problem area. We could totally see it coming down the Long Draw or the Colorado River drainage, coming into, Grand Lake that way, or coming up through Hague Creek, dropping into the Fall River basin and, coming out to Estes Park. So for quite a long while, that was our concern of trying to figure out how we're going to hold it in that area. And then over time, we came to realize that that fire was going to grow in a lot of different places. And so, as you might recall, it started over there and, grew exponentially all on forest lands north of the park. And then in the later parts of that fire, moved down toward the North Fork drainage of the park, which is on the far northeast side of the park, adjacent to Glen Haven and that area. And so I think that was actually a serious concern for many of us. We could see, I know from my house at night, I was, looking out over Lake Estes and seeing this, bright red glowing, very threatening looking fire that looked really close. It actually wasn't as close as it looked, but it looked like it was just over the hill. So there was a lot of effort that was put into that. And we were just kind of bouncing all over the place. The incident command post for the Cameron Peak fire was down in Loveland. It moved a couple of times, but I was going down there pretty frequently to meet with our Forest Service colleagues. And of course, we had, I don't even remember how many, 8 or 9, maybe more, type 1 or type 2 incident command teams. That is the highest level of incident command teams in the United States that work on these fires. And so it was a very big, complex, hairy deal. And so we were all kind of focused on that fire, right, on Cameron Peak, thinking, it was going to be coming into Estes, when we had a surprise and had a fire start on the west side. So Kyle, you want to move to the next slide there? And the East Troublesome fire started over there, well west of the west side of the park, the Colorado River District, on October the 14th. And, that was kind of punking around for a while. It didn't seem to be moving very quickly. It was moving south, moving east toward the park. We had set up, trigger points west of the park that would kind of tell us when we would need to evacuate Grand Lake, Granby, or the park. And then, suddenly, very quickly, by the next slide, on October 21st, so a week later, that fire made a very historic 18-mile run into the park's west side. That is one of the most impressive pictures I think I've ever seen of a fire. It's just chilling. It's beautiful in a way, but chilling, especially knowing that that was the fire that moved into Grand Lake. And within a 24-hour period, it had moved 100,000 acres. And so what happened is, the fire hit that trigger point we had established several miles west of Grand Lake in the park, and it blew through it like wildfire, unseen ever before wildfire. Many of the staff had, when we were evacuating, there was like an 8-minute evacuation window. So very, very frightening, very stressful, for of course, all of the people that lost their homes in Grand Lake, and then all of our staff in the park that live in the park. They had to evacuate quickly. Like I said, our district ranger over there had to, she was trying to help people get out very rapidly. She actually was trapped by the fire, wasn't able to go south back home to her family in Grand Lake to help them. She ended up having to come north along Trail Ridge Road and come into Estes Park that night around midnight to escape the fire. So that's, how crazy and unpredictable and hot these fires are. And as you all might remember, this fire, we thought maybe it would go north along the Colorado River drainage and then slop over into Milner Pass and then potentially get into Fall River that way. No, it just went directly west. Like I said, it was 100,000 acres in 24 hours. It actually went up and over the Continental Divide. So it crossed more than 1.5 miles of tundra, which, there's no normal burnable vegetation in tundra. You're well above tree line, 12,000 feet or more. It jumped up and over the Continental Divide and then down into the east side of Rocky Mountain National Park. And that's the fire, of course, that evacuated Estes Park. And not only, did it destroy on the west side, we had, I think, 26 buildings destroyed. And then, as it came up and over the divide, we saw it spread into two little forks. And we were all very concerned for Estes Park, but fortunately, we had done a lot of fuels treatments in those wildland urban interface areas, including prescribed fires, cutting and burning piles, for a number of years, about 3,000 acres worth of fuels treatments that really helped to slow and to stop that fire. And then, of course, the excellent work of the firefighters that were out there. And then the weather, of course, helped us. So this chart just kind of shows the total number of acres that were burned in the park, about 10% of the park, by both the Cameron Peak and the East Troublesome Fire. So just another little update on Grand Lake. By far, the majority of the damage within the park is over on the west side, as you could see from that previous map. We did lose the 26 structures. This shows a photo of the Grand Lake entrance. All the kiosks remained, which is crazy. There's a couple more over to the left there. But that building that's burned is our fee remed office, or the fee office, where our staff, get prepared for the day and have their offices. So that was completely destroyed, as well as, go ahead and go to the next slide. Probably many of you are aware of the Onahu Lodge. It's just an incredible, actually probably my favorite historic building in the entire park. But that was the Onahu Lodge over on the west side. It had been serving as seasonal trail crew housing for quite some time. And all the trail crew lived in there. So that's the Green Mountain area over on the west side, which was all of our seasonal housing, and all but 2 of the cabins there burned down. So virtually 95% of our entire seasonal housing is gone now on the west side. This year, we've applied for funding to get those buildings restored or rebuilt, actually. There was a number of other buildings that burned as well. But in the meantime, our seasonal staff, we weren't able to find any housing for them in Grand Lake. The monthly rentals were something like $4,500 for a 1-bedroom, because they can get it from tourism, right? So we are going to be housing all of our seasonal staff in Winter Park, which is, as you all know, like an hour from the entrance of the park. And then, of course, most people don't work right at the entrance, they work well into the park. So it has definitely hampered our ability to hire seasonal staff this year, because if you're a GS5 or a GS7 working in the park, very relatively low income, the idea of driving for 2 hours to 3 hours every single day to go to your job and back is pretty daunting, and it's not really economically possible for a lot of people. So the other picture there, a number of trails were burned over, including, many bridges. And so, a lot of those trails have been closed. They're closed now. As you all might recall, these fires burned well into November. And so we haven't had the chance to get out there and evaluate what the cleanup is going to be. We will get out there as soon as the snow melts. We just got a new batch. And of course, there's usually more on the west side, but as soon as the snow clears, we'll be out there, very quickly evaluating the trail conditions, seeing which ones we can reopen. We've got, a number of bridges that we're ready to rebuild, but of course it all takes time. So we'll reopen the trails, as quickly as we can, but some of these trails may be closed for a couple of years. So that, again, that biggest impact is on the west side, but there are trails, of course, Fern Lake area, Marine Park area, that were impacted on this side of the park as well. And, you know, those highest used areas will be the priority to get reopened this year. But again, it's just going to take some time, and we don't really have an exact date of when all that will happen. And so I think the last slide, just wanted to kind of highlight, we did get a lot of good support. You all know this from, you know, our elected officials. That's Congressman Neguse and Senator Bennett there with Fire Chief David Wolf. And you can see over in that left-hand corner, the mask and the concerned face of Eric Rose, and then myself. So we did get a lot of attention because, of course, there were the two largest fires in Colorado history. I think prior to 2002, the largest fire was something like 30,000 acres. And just these two fires, and you all know there were many other fires in Colorado, but just these two burned over 400,000 acres. So it just kind of represents what we're going to be seeing in the future. A hotter, drier climate, you know, the climate change. We can expect to see more of these larger wildfires, and the coordination, the collaboration, the partnership is really key. You know, our partnership with the Forest Service, the Arapahoe Roosevelt, couldn't be better. We just have a wonderful, long-standing relationship with them, and we work with them regularly. And obviously, you know, with the town of Estes Park, with Chief Wolf and Wes, with the police department and the town managers and the mayor, we just have a really great relationship where we're able to plan together. You know, we spend a lot of time looking at those evacuation zones, those trigger points, you know, how we can work together to ensure the safety of Estes Park. And so as bad as it was, you know, y'all, it could have really been far worse, especially over here on the east side. And so I'm sure y'all probably have questions at the end, but I'll conclude the fire bit here, and we will turn it back over to Kyle to give a few updates about some additional park projects.
Great, thank you, Darla. And, you know, I think we all have our memories and moments, you know, during last year's fire season. And I think, as Darla mentioned, when the National Weather Service called us, because you remember that fog was over the Estes Park community, called us very, very early on that morning and said, we're picking up heat on the east side of the divide. Then I think that's the moment that we all too were like, it just came over to the east side of the divide. So we all have those own personal moments, I think, where it resonates with us. One other thing that I wanted to share too, we have seen an increase in illegal campfires in Rocky Mountain National Park, commiserate with our increase in visitation. So I wanted just to share that. And last year we did not have as many of those, which was a very, very positive thing. So just to wrap up a couple of other project updates. Many of you may recall we had a major road repair work between just south of Deer Ridge Junction to the Bear Lake Road Junction. We had that last year. Our hope was that that project would be completed. Unfortunately, it is not. And so we will be starting that project again in early to mid-May and sharing information when we have a better idea of the start date. Just a refresher, that's similar impacts as last year, which was nightly closures. So 7 p.m. on Sunday night to 7 a.m. Monday morning. That section of road will be closed. And then again on Monday night at 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Tuesday morning. So we'll get that information out, but we wanted to use this opportunity to just provide that to you. Many of you may recall that last year we were telling you that we were doing a new HVAC system on the National Historic Landmark Beaver Meadows Visitor Center that was completed in the late 60s. When sustainability for energy maybe wasn't really as high of a priority. And so we've been working on that program, and we all been moved out of that facility and are eager to have that back open this coming summer. So stay tuned on that day as well. Another, just wanted to share with you the reminder on the Alluvial Fan Flood, and that we had done so much repair. And but the one thing that we were still working on was the very popular Alluvial Fan Trail. And we just wanted to share that this success happened and we reopened this trail in October. But because of everything else that was going on, we weren't able to celebrate that as much with the community. So we just wanted to share with you, and hopefully many of you have enjoyed and experienced the Onahu Alluvial Fan Trail. As you know, that infrastructure was wiped out in the floods of 2013. We were really excited with our fantastic trail crew and engineers to be able to build that trail to be accessible on the west side of the trail, and use, again, sustainable material that will be more long lasting. And you can see that we had a ribbon cutting in October of last year with our trails crew and with Rocky Mountain. You can't see or recognize many of these masked folks, but also with Rocky Mountain Conservancy and a few of their board members, as well as their director, Estes, to celebrate, as they were a significant partner in funding that work. So I wanted to share that ribbon cutting, and again, hope that you've enjoyed it, or if you haven't had a chance to go enjoy it this spring. And then just one more thing before we wrap up for some Q&As is just wanted to let you all know, as we've talked to your group about this before, that we are almost complete with our short 500-foot connector trail leaving the Aspen Glen campground toward the Fish Hatchery Road that's outside of Rocky Mountain National Park. And eventually this will connect with the Fall River Trail that the town of Estes Park is working on completing as well. And so that will be exciting when that whole trail is complete, so that people can use that as bike access or other, walking as well. So now probably what many of you are waiting for is the opportunity just to have some your questions answered. And I'm going to jump over to chat. I didn't want to do that while I was sharing my screen. So I'm going to stop sharing that. And then we're going to jump over to the chat. So okay, and I know maybe Darla has been looking at that as well through this, but we're just going to jump in so that we have an opportunity, because many of you might have similar questions. Okay, so last year, if you had, for example, a 6 to 8 a.m. reservation, you could enter any time after 6 a.m. and did not have to enter by 8. Will that be the same? Last year, we really tried to emphasize, as we are again this year, that you really should be coming into the park during your timed entry slot. That's the whole reason that we're doing the timed entry slot, is so that we can manage that visitor use throughout the day. So if you have a 6 a.m. slot and you're coming in at 10, it's really defeating the purpose. And so our entrance station staff will continue to encourage, again, you can't come before your timed entry reservation, but we continue to ask you to come between the times that your slot is for. It will be hopefully extenuating circumstances if you have to come in after that time slot. But again, the whole purpose is to spread use out through the day. And we're doing that in order to have people enter during that reservation time. Okay, so I think that was a couple of the questions that we had there. So again, you can leave the park and come back in, and we will be monitoring that as well. Okay, will the hiker shuttle be running from the Convention and Visitors Bureau this year? It will not be. Last year, we did not have that shuttle bus running, and unfortunately this year, again, we will not have that shuttle running. That shuttle runs every 30 minutes. And again, one of those pictures that you may have seen from the very beginning of the presentation showed the queuing and the stacking of that line. And so with our capacity of our shuttle buses, people would be probably standing in line there for hours before they got on a hiker shuttle. We also would have to have a staff person present there, as we have in the past with volunteers, to help people understand that reservations were needed as well. And we don't have that level of staffing again this summer. We look forward to, after COVID, being able to use that as a really important tool again when we're not so concerned about capacity and congestion in the wait to get on the bus. How will those outlying areas be managed? As we mentioned, they are a challenge. We know they're going to be a challenge. And so again, those are Park Service areas. An entrance pass is required to go to those areas, which I know sometimes is confusing. I think for years there was an urban legend or a myth that those were free areas. You could just go to those places. We don't actively collect fees at those locations, but those are entrance pass areas. So obviously we're maintaining bathrooms and trailheads, monitoring those areas. So those are certainly part of the national park, and we rely on those funds greatly and the services that we provide. So again, those would be considered rest of park. So a reservation would be required between 9 and 3 a.m. to visit those areas. Again, we know a lot of people will be getting there prior to 9. And so parking might be a challenge again in those outlying areas. Okay. Long's Peak parking area often fills by 5 a.m. in the summer. Any special management plans there? No. So Long's Peak, obviously, a lot of people are getting there before the sun rises to summit Long's Peak. And so we know, again, that that's an area that's going to fill up early in the morning just because of the use there. We also have concerns in our outlying areas because the spillover then ends up in county roads like Long's Peak, as well as Lumpy Ridge area, and spills over into our neighbors' driveways as well. So we understand that that is a challenge. The parking capacity at Long's Peak is oftentimes the deterrent as far as people accessing the Long's Peak area. Okay. So I'm going to keep going to the chat here. Darla, I think there's a question in here about, have you considered offering a higher priced all access pass for individuals that use the park regularly versus seasonal park visitors? Something some residents may be willing to pay to avoid having to make reservations. So maybe the concept of, do locals get preferential treatment to visit Rocky Mountain National Park?
Right, yeah, and unfortunately, no. Many of our other colleagues in the National Park Service that are adjacent to communities are getting those same questions, but it is Rocky and all other national parks are going to be beholden to the American people, and so we are not allowed to give special preference to locals. There are a couple things with this year's plan that I think will more benefit locals maybe than those who live further away. And one is, because of your proximity to the park, you know how the system operates, you know how to make a reservation more likely. You can easily access, if you need to get to these places, of course, we want you to get a permit because that's the whole point of the system, is to spread that use throughout the day and to be able to control that access. But that said, if you want to get up into Bear Lake, early in the morning, you have a greater potential of doing that than somebody who gets up in Denver and has to drive up an hour and a half here. Also, that second reservation system for the rest of park, that is everything except the Bear Lake corridor. We moved that time period from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. to only, incorporate the big bell curve extreme visitation that we normally see during those hours. And so if you recall, last year, it was all day long for the whole park. And so by reducing that reservation period for the rest of park, again, we want people to get reservations because we think that does help. But if you want to come in and go over to Grand Lake at 7 a.m., you can do that without a permit. If you want to come back through the park, you will have to wait until the end of the permit system. So that would be after 3 p.m. But that cross-park travel, I think, is enhanced or a benefit to locals in particular that can go back and forth early and before 9 and after 3 p.m. So there's a few things there that I think do benefit those that live nearby. But yeah, we can't unfortunately provide special access for locals.
Okay, a couple of other questions that I might be able to combine in an answer. So one is, asking about some of the trail access and burned areas above tree line. Could those areas be reopened? So we'll talk a little bit about that. So if you recall from the map, you know that there's different impacts in rocky and trail systems. So Cameron Peak, very different impacts on the trail system. For instance, from the Cow Creek area or from the North Fork trail system, we did not see as much burning in those areas. But obviously some of those trails are accessed through Forest Service land as well. So working with our partners in coordinating when those trails reopen. So that is kind of a whole different ballgame if you think about that area of the park. Then if you were to jump over on the Cameron Peak area to some of the Corral Creek trailhead, Hague Creek, as Darla mentioned, Mirror Lake, a lot of that trail system and infrastructure was burned. So we lost a number of bridges and there's burned areas which would also impact people getting lost potentially. So it's very different depending on where you are in the park. So we have to make sure we get some of that infrastructure back, like some of the bridges, before we just open those areas. And so that's for the Cameron Peak. To go down to the east troublesome, as Darla mentioned, west side impacts and east side impacts. So I know some of the questions are, can we just get up high where the trees are not as much of a hazard? So Darla mentioned that the trails crew and wilderness crew were able to get in to assess most of those areas, but then the snows came. So we'll be able to assess again safely what areas might have additional down trees from wind throw from this winter. And then also what might be more directionally challenged. So two things, if you're walking through a burned area, it's potentially easier to get lost because you're not following a trail. So that's something we need to consider. And then the second thing, again, as Darla mentioned, is the infrastructure. So you saw that picture of boardwalks and trails burned. So we also don't want additional resource impacts of people finding their own way and maybe going into areas that weren't burnt, but now we'll have more resource impacts as a result of people shortcutting and going different directions. So those are all things we have to work through. I think that we believe that a number of a number of trails will be opening and might be opening, May through July. So I think we've got a lot of good news on that front. We just have to be able to really get in there and safely assess what that looks like. Places like the Green Mountain Trail might be a different ballgame as far as whether that will reopen this summer because of the significant impacts in that drainage. So just, to give you kind of an idea if that helps, because I know there's some questions. What about this? What about this? What about this? Hopefully that helps with that. And then the other question that I think was consistently asked by a number of people is help us understand how the Bear Lake Road corridor permit system works. So many of you are aware that since 2016, we have been restricting access when we've had significant congestion, as Darla mentioned. That kiosk is up past the Marine Park Discovery Center. We will be moving that kiosk down toward the junction of Bear Lake Road because the Bear Lake Road corridor, the whole corridor will be part of that reservation system. Because if it's not, then you guys can all imagine what Marine Park Road and Fern Lake Road the impacts that will be there. So that kiosk will be moved down toward Trail Ridge Junction. And right now we're assessing where the best turnaround ratio is, as well as less queuing distance back to the Beaver Meadows entrance. So those are just some of the things that we're looking at now. We will have staff in that kiosk that will be connecting with visitors during their timed entry into the park to head up that section of road. So we will have staff at that kiosk that will be checking people's timed entry into that area. So hopefully that helps with kind of thinking through what those logistics look like. Darla, we've had a question about how might we utilize volunteers again this summer and what that might look like.
Yeah, so we're getting a handle on that now. You know, we weren't able to use as many volunteers last year as we wanted to because of COVID, and we are, you know, gradually increasing that this year. But we have to make sure we're right sizing it so that we've got adequate supervision and good, thorough, safe job descriptions for the volunteers and whatnot. And so what I would say is to get on the Park Services website and look at the volunteer link there. I'm not sure, I haven't done that lately to see, you know, what that is, but it's certainly worth an inquiry to find out if there are additional slots needed. We've got a full-time volunteer coordinator. Her name is Sarah Corning. And I don't know if that's her email address, but I think, Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong, that you can find out about the volunteers on the website now. And what groups are going to be working this year. For example, you know, the road hogs or the wheat warriors, and what kind of group sizes they have. Again, it may be a little bit more limited this year because of the COVID and because of, as Kyle mentioned earlier, having fewer staff this year because of the one seasonal per bedroom rule that we have in the federal government. I think we've got, you know, 32 or something like that, fewer staff this year because of those housing restrictions. So yeah, as you all know, we rely on our volunteers greatly. I tell people all the time, we couldn't run the park without our volunteers. And so we really appreciate those of you who already are volunteering, and hopefully if you want to volunteer this year, you'll be able to. But like I said, you know, we're not back to full speed again. And it's just a matter of, you know, aligning those volunteer supervisors with the volunteer staff.
Very good, Darla. Another question is, you know, maybe explaining how, as we're looking at our increase in visitation, there's a question in the chat as far as how we work with the surrounding community when it comes to development as well.
I'm trying to find that question. Is that the one about new development and what would RMNP envision as the ideal gateway community?
Yes.
Right. So both in Estes Park and Grand Lake, when there are adjacent, you know, lands within the town or within the county that are adjacent to the park, we do provide comments on some of those development proposals. We don't do it for everything, obviously, but if there are, you know, visual impacts, say somebody wants to build a 6-story hotel and, you know, there are visual impacts to the park, we will write letters that detail the park's concerns about that, either from view sheds, you know, most particularly from the park looking out, but also through wilderness view sheds in the park as well. So, you know, we want to work very closely with Estes Park and with Grand Lake on any kind of development proposals, in particular on park boundaries that would have an impact on the park. And then, you know, we're all in it together in terms of the numbers of people that this community can, you know, the carrying capacity, essentially, you know, even including our water and sewer systems. So, you know, there are other towns that are facing great stressors like this. If you've been to Moab, Utah in the last 10 years, you've seen how dramatically that town has developed with, you know, hotels just going mad everywhere. And, you know, very tall hotels as well. There's not the space here in Estes to develop to that extent. So, you know, we're kind of protected a little bit from mass development because of the topography. But we do comment, like I said, on some of those proposals that would impact the park, whether it's view shed, night sky, wildlife corridors, things like that, soundscapes that would impact the park.
Great. We've had a couple of other questions that I think we can address. We ask if we are considering more kind of fast pass lanes or gates, auto gates. We will be doing the Fall River entrance next year. And so we'll be able to share more information about the timeline of that this fall. But one of the things that will be incorporated in that redesign is a fast pass lane at the Fall River entrance. So we are incorporating that there. And then we're also continuing to think through the Beaver Meadows entrance as far as a lane that possibly is extended a little different, or a design for that would help the queuing for the fast pass gate at the Beaver Meadows entrance as well, so that people can get over there sooner and use that. We've been asked some more specifics about the reservation system pertaining to if you have an annual pass, do you still need to make a reservation? And you do, and the reservation fee is $2, but obviously your annual pass covers your entrance into the park. So you would just do the $2 reservation. So bicyclists can access the park without a timed entry permit, but they do have to have an entrance pass, the appropriate entrance pass. So I think that answers that question. Let's see.
Hey, Kyle, there's one in there you might have skipped over, and I think you're probably best to answer, but it's about the backcountry reservation system and the pay.gov situation.
Yes. That might have been one of our other indications as to the COVID crush and how many people are really, really wanting to recreate in their public lands this year, which again is a wonderful thing. As we've always said, and Darla's mentioned, it's when people are more energized and engaged and not apathetic, it's a good thing. We had a lot of a good thing when it came to our wilderness permits. So the 2 times that we tried, that our wonderful team in the wilderness office tried to get wilderness reservations set, it overloaded the pay.gov system. And so we then had to go with a random drawing. And so as we continue to look at what that looks like next year and working with recreation.gov for a longer term plan, and there's pros and cons to that. So one of the wonderful things about our wilderness office was being able to do those reservations in person on March 1st, as well as online. And this year we weren't able to do that in person. But just to give you all an idea, we had 6,000 people that entered in for the random drawing for our wilderness permits, which is about 6 times what we normally have. So again, it just shows that people are very, very eager to be able to enjoy and experience their public lands this summer. And it's not just Rocky that's experiencing it, as we mentioned, it's others. So stay tuned for a better future fix for our wilderness permit system. Our wilderness office is working on that now. And again, pros and cons to all of these different systems and reservations, but it's kind of the reality of where we are now. Darla, are there other ones that I?
Yeah, I'm looking at, and I'm just reading these as in real time here. Why restore fire break lines between Estes Park and the park, given the predictions for another highly dangerous fire season? So I'm not entirely sure I understand that question, but in terms of restoring fire break lines, but it is our intent to work closely with Estes Park wherever we can along the boundary with Estes Park and Rocky Mountain National Park, and private landowners, of course, have their role as well. Because I think, we need to be looking at every place that a fire would, naturally come down a drainage or, through an area. Like now we've seen twice, the Fern Lake fire in 2012 and now last year's East Troublesome fire in the same area. And so again, those fuel treatments that we did in that area were really key. Also, Marine Park is a bit of a wetland, and that lack of vegetation and moisture vegetation definitely helped as well. So it is absolutely in all of our collective best interest to figure out how can we work together to do whatever makes the most sense, whether it's prescribed fire that would have a more natural kind of process, or mechanical treatments, in other words, cutting and thinning, So yes, it is our intent to continue to work. And I think actually there's a presentation coming up with us by Land Trust with David Wolf and our Fire Management Officer, Michael Welling, to talk about some of those things. So I would say if you're interested in having more input on that or learning more about it, to maybe look into that. Let's see, given the increased number of winter visitors, any chance the park may deploy or allow volunteers to deploy temporary trail markers to enable visitors to safely use more of the trails without getting lost? Yeah, I'd say that's probably not likely because first of all, these areas are in wilderness. And so, we want to try to maintain that wilderness, condition and an opportunity for people to safely access. But the other thing is, especially in the fire areas, we're concerned that there may be some dangerous areas. A lot of times when fires burn, they create these holes that you could fall into and, would be really a serious injury, if not fatal, if, you are out there kind of on your own. So we really want to get a good assessment of that fire damage and put in the proper infrastructure to be able to support that so that, that we don't increase the opportunity for people getting lost or in danger. So let's see, that's the last one there.
Another question we ask, will Upper Beaver Meadows Road open this year? And yes, it will open again this year. When we have that road construction project, it will be closed at night, obviously, from that 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. window because of that's in the middle of where the construction is. But other than those times, it will be. I think we answered how will you differentiate the different permits and enforce them beyond entry. I think again, we'll be looking at our entrance stations as well as the kiosk that I mentioned. So those will be able to determine what permits are for what locations. And we'll be having to have a hard end at 9. So we just continue to encourage people to not be coming into the park at 5 till 9 because you might be in a long line and might reach our entrance station after 9 a.m. So that would be the other thing that we would want to talk about. And then the Bear Lake Road corridor, we've been asked, will we continue to have restrictions on the Bear Lake Road corridor this year with the specific reservation system for there? And we hope not, and we are planning for that not to be the case because that's what we're looking at for the number of permits based on the parking capacity. However, what we would strongly encourage people to do is realize that they might not get a parking space at the trailhead that they would like. So they need to be thinking through, if I can't find a parking space at this particular parking lot, how do I get there by riding the shuttle bus from another parking area? So, again, not having restrictions on the Bear Lake Road corridor in addition to the permits, but just planning ahead is going to be critical as you're not guaranteed a parking space in a particular area. Let's see here.
I'm trying to figure out where we left off because it seems like we skipped.
Someone asked about tribal relations, Darla, if you want to reference that.
Yeah, so we've really been working hard in the park on improving those tribal relations. And you all know we've got a number of tribes that have affiliations with the park. And so over the past few years, we've been working with the Utes, Southern Utes, Arapahoes, and others that not only historically used and were very much a part of the park, but are still present here today. And they still have very much an interest in doing that. So for every project that we have, that's a development project that, is something like a new footprint that could potentially impact grounds that were maybe, sacred to the tribes or have some other impact to the tribes, we write letters to all of those tribal folks and describe what that project is and what the area of impact is, the map, and those sorts of things, and ask for their input. So we have regular meetings with them, and like I say, reach out to them very frequently to do that. We're also working on some interpretive planning projects as well to better talk about how tribes are, as I mentioned, a part of the park today. It's not like, oh, they were here once long ago. They are still very much a part of the park and very much of the park interest. So we've got, like I said, project management. That's our cultural compliance is, the tribal relations is a big part of that. And then inviting them here and asking them to help with our interpretation and the stories and the histories that we tell in the park.
I think we probably are needing to wrap up. And so I just will say a few more comments and then pass it back to Darla for her closing remarks. One other question is, what about if I walk in? And so we realize there's a lot of people that live right on the boundary, and that is fine. You do not need a reservation for that. You just need your entrance pass. And it's just mainly if you're accessing the areas by vehicle. So it doesn't count if you park along Highway 7 and walk into Lily Lake. That's accessing the area by vehicles. But if you leave your vehicle behind and then walk into those areas, that's key. And again, just realizing that we are in another frontier, and we've been in another frontier the last 10 years. And we know that it's challenging, and we understand that for particularly local residents. This is very, very different, and we understand the heartache on that as well. So we want to acknowledge that and really, really, really hope that our community members continue to engage when we look at the visitor use long-range management planning to really see what we do to address this level of visitation. There's no easy solutions, but we are really trying to adhere to the National Park Service mission of preserving and protecting for future generations while we allow for recreation for all of us now. So thank you again so much for your time and support, and I'll pass it over to Darla.
Yeah, well, Kyle, you kind of took the words right out of my mouth. Just in terms of all this visitor use management, it's a real thing, and it's not just Rocky. Certainly, it's a major concern across the entire front range of Colorado, as well as many areas of the West that are just seeing crushing visitation. And so, with our 1916 Organic Act that established the national park, it requires us to protect those resources and provide for good visitor experiences. So, it's our solid belief that allowing just, unfettered, uncontrolled access of millions of people does neither of those things. And so we are paid to, help manage the park. And, we are looking for solutions in this long-term plan for what would best do that, protect the park and the resources. So y'all are really very important to that process. Wherever you stand on the visitor access piece, we know that we're going to continue to get increased visitation. And I actually heard a statistic the other day that, by 2050, that the population of Colorado could double. So as you all know, the majority of our visitation does come from Colorado. And in times, when people don't travel as much, maybe internationally or even across the country, Rocky is a lot of people's backyard playground. We've seen last year in particular, and it's expected this year, a whole new user group from people who had never gotten outside before. Maybe they went to the malls before or NASCAR or something, and they weren't able to do that. And so they discovered the great outdoors. And, while it's great for people to understand and appreciate the value and the solace and the respite that the outdoors gives us, it presents us with a serious challenge that now we've got, new users as well that want to come to these lands and, maybe aren't as quite prepared or have the equipment or the knowledge to travel here safely. And so that's our new reality, and it's a challenge, and there's no great one solution, but we are very much forward looking and want to try to do the best thing we can for the resources and for the community and the visitors. So with that, I really want to thank you all for attending today. A lot of great questions. We didn't get to all of them. One super quick one, bike riders, you do not need a permit. Will we be controlling bike riders in the future? That's a question we really grapple with because, we don't see a lot of bicyclists yet, especially compared to say Boulder. But, you know, if we start seeing that, then we'll need to do something about it. So for this year only, bicyclists will not need a permit. And then this long-term plan that we're planning to do will try to address some of those issues with bicyclists as well. So thank you all very much for attending. We appreciate it. And I don't know, are we turning it back to you, Becky, or?
Yes, yes, and thank you so much. We obviously have a high interest in the park since so many of us live here because of the park. The League of Women Voters is always happy to give you a forum to talk. And just real quickly, because I know y'all need to move on, note that the League of Women Voters has some upcoming events. On April 26th, we have Meet Joe Neguse, who, no, Joe Neguse, I guess, is on April the 26th at 7 p.m. We have a member coffee chat on May the 8th at 10 o'clock where you can call in and we can just talk about different issues. Our annual meeting is May the 19th, and we will have a guest speaker about recycling in Larimer County. That's Lou Perez, the project director for the Larimer County Solid Waste. And then after he's done, the non-members drop off and we will have another membership meeting where we do our annual events. Let's see, we have another slide here. And the mission of League of Women Voters is to empower voters and defend democracy. And we have a vision where democracy, it has every person that has a desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate in voting. We appreciate everyone's participation in organization. If you haven't joined, membership is open to everyone above 16 years of age. That's men and women, even though it's League of Women Voters, we welcome all. And lastly, we have a slide that has our webpage, lwv-estespark.org, where we will have a recording of this, other recordings, and a schedule of our events, and all sorts of other information about the league. So we appreciate all of you who have called in, and don't forget to support the League of Women Voters by buying duck race tickets to support either the recycling or the voter services committee. Thank you all for joining in.
Thank you.